Okay. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with strategic planning. And the last time when RLI went through and made changes to the curriculum, which was just recently, they moved strategic planning from part 2 to part 3. I'm okay either way, but some of you may have already taken strategic planning if you had taken part 2 more than a year or so ago. If so, hopefully this will not just be a rehash, but we'll introduce new concepts. And it's also the only session still in RLI that's a double session. That was certainly not my idea, even though I'm facilitating it, but there is a lot to cover, and we will go through it and use up all of our time. We will make up for the time that we started a little bit late. That will not be a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And again, when we're sharing screens, we're not seeing everyone because we're seeing a document. So it's even more important for people to speak up, ask questions, share best practices, things like that. So with every module in RLI, under the title, it has this very nice, simple, but very thoughtful statement about what the whole intent of this module is. I can strengthen my club by promoting and leading insightful planning. Every word in there is a critical word, every single word. And as we pointed out before, not everyone who is taking this Rotary Leadership Institute is either currently or is planning to be a club officer or director or president. We all can be Rotary leaders regardless of what role we have in our clubs. So we can strengthen our club by promoting and leading insightful planning. That's for all of us. Now, for those of you who are presidents-elect, this may hit home very strongly with you because you're in the process of preparing for your upcoming year as president, and planning is obviously a huge part of that. So in terms of the session goals, we will understand, hopefully, the value and the process. So planning is a process. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we're going to talk about all of that this morning, as well as the key elements to the plan itself. We're not going to look at analyzing your Rotary Club today, but you certainly should understand how to analyze your Rotary Club and the importance of that analysis as part of your planning process. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about reviewing possible areas for improvement, and I'm going to take the word possible out. All of us, every Rotary Club has areas for improvement. It's not like some clubs are perfect, no such thing. And discuss how those improvements should be made. So we're going to kind of near the end talk about how to execute the plan, which is often the hardest part of planning, is the actual execution. So we're going to talk about that as well. There are some materials. The strategic planning guide we'll take a fairly quick look at. I think it's a good starting point for thinking about what goes into strategic planning. Your participant guide does have a self-evaluation. I'll just be honest, it is way too long. If we want to engage members, one of the ways to engage them is to not have long surveys and self-evaluations. So our recommendation is it's a good idea to self-evaluate, but maybe a little bit shorter. There's also a link to Rotary Club Central, which is going to be very important for those of you who are going to be incoming club officers. So this is where you enter and monitor your club's goals, which is obviously very important as part of our planning process. So if you have that version of the participant guide and you click on this, it'll bring up Rotary Club Central, which we're not going to talk about in detail. Okay, and again, questions, best practices are welcome. And I'm going to slide over to a little Word document that we're going to use to kind of track your ideas here. So hopefully you can all see this. It's just an outline for strategic planning.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about, as the guide said, planning is a process. And we're going to talk about the beginning part of it. We're going to talk about the middle, and we're going to talk about the end. And again, many of you, maybe not through your Rotary clubs, but maybe through your business or your vocation, have been involved in strategic planning. So we'd love to hear kind of what works well from what you have experienced also. So let's start with the beginning phase, which I would call pre-planning or planning to plan, which becomes a little bit circuitous. If you're thinking about planning to plan, that's actually legitimate. You do need to plan to plan. You don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to plan today. You really need to prepare. And there's a lot of considerations that goes into effective planning. And I'm just going to, and by the way, I'll send this out or send it to Kathy and she'll send it out with other materials when we're done. So if you're thinking about having some kind of a planning session, and let's hold off on the strategic part for a second. Let's just talk about planning in general. If we're preparing to have some kind of a planning session, what are the things that we would need to consider or think about in terms of preparation?
But you need to come up with a goal first, because you can't plan unless you know where you're going.
Okay.
And also you need to know where you've been.
So one at a time, and I want to start with this one first because that's a really interesting point. So I think it's good to have a sense of what the vision is. But in many cases, the planning itself will either reinforce that, or maybe the planning process comes up with slightly different thinking than what I thought going in. So I would say it's good to have a goal and a vision in mind, but it may not be what comes out of the planning meeting. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Especially if you are incoming club president, you may have a goal and a vision in mind. If you allow the planning process to unfold, you may discover that the club's view may be slightly different, hopefully not significantly different than what you had going in. So I agree with you with the idea that you've got something in mind. What else was, something else was mentioned?
Know where you've been.
Sorry?
Know where you've been.
Know where you've been. So that's like that assessment tool that we mentioned in the participant guide. Know where you've been. What's worked well? What hasn't worked well? Something has worked well, it may be a good idea to continue it and maybe even do it more. If things haven't gone well, it's good to know that so we can figure out if we still need to do something like that and it hasn't gone well before, do we know why it hasn't gone well before, and can we make it better if we're going to continue it so it's likely going to be better going forward, right? So that's really important. And it's important.
Will the club be behind it?
Yes, that's right.
Will
if
the
something
club
has
be behind it?
I'm saying, say that again, Pat.
Will the club be behind it or involved
That's
in
right.
it?
That's where I think you have to have done an assessment, a
Right.
good survey of where you are at this moment in time.
And not everyone's going to think the same, right?
Exactly so. So
Yep.
what might be 5 pieces that folks are looking at, and then moving from that point or creating a hierarchy of some sort to which one you might address first, second, or third, depending on how that's being presented.
Tabulate the survey, yeah.
Excellent.
But this notion about will the club be supportive, I think that's going to be a theme throughout this entire process because it's so important. Tabulate the survey, right? So before we get into that planning meeting, we should have already taken the survey, gotten the results, and evaluated it. So we can come to the meeting with what I would call the conclusions or the findings. We don't want to spend a lot of time in a planning meeting reviewing things because it takes a lot of time and you really want people to be thinking about it before they show up, right? So tabulate the survey and hopefully review the results prior to the meeting. Does that make sense?
That's prioritizing.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. What else do we need to do in terms of preparation?
I guess for me, this is kind of super granular, but like, shouldn't we have like, distractions eliminated, where we have our materials prepared, like we are ready to work?
Yes. So, not the perfect analogy, but you'll appreciate this. My role with RLI is primarily to host a Zoom meeting. There's preparation for that. There are facilitators who will send me files that say, Jeff, I'd like to show this when we get to my module. So all of that kind of operational preparation is critical, which is why I'm usually on the Zoom call an hour to an hour and a half before we start, because there's a lot of things to do just for preparation. It's the same thing with a planning meeting. Have everything prepared. You want that meeting to be crisp, focused. You don't want diversions like you were saying. Oh, we don't have a copy of this. Now we're gonna have to stop the meeting. Someone has to go make a copy. You just want everything to be prepared. Excellent. What else?
I think you need to have a preliminary budget, how much it's going to cost to do the project.
Can you explain that just a little bit more? I want to make sure I've captured it right.
Well, if you're going to do a project where it's going to be a fundraiser of some sort, you need to have a little bit of a pot to start the fundraising project. And if it's going to be like a overseas thing, like we sponsor wells in Africa, things like that, you need to be tied into international and know what they have available and what you can afford to put toward the project.
So if this is okay, because I think there's other areas where that would be helpful too, I just put some upfront research if that's needed. Some due diligence, if you want to call it that, just things that you need to investigate. It would be helpful to know in preparation for the meeting, including what you said.
I think just anticipating questions, when you're bringing something forward, and that is exactly, I think, what he was saying with the preliminary, subject. You don't need to have a different one, but I think just coming to mind of, if this was being presented to me, what questions would I have? I think that that's really helpful.
Yeah. I was going to put something in parentheses, but I know from my experience, I do anticipate questions, but I've also learned that I'm going to get a question that there's no way I could have anticipated, which is great. But I didn't say, well, no, you can't ask that question because I didn't anticipate it. But there's always that question that you were not prepared for, and that sometimes brings out the best discussions. What else?
Jeff, I think one of the things that when you're doing your pre-planning is you're probably determining, who's going to do this planning. Is it going to be a task force? Is it going to be a small committee? Who's going to do the planning?
Okay, that's great. I put it in all caps, not that it's any more important, but OMG. I've seen some planning meetings. So if I'm organizing a planning meeting, I have a sense in mind of not just the who, but how many. I've been asked to be a facilitator for a couple meetings where there are about 60 people. And I just said, you know what? This is not going to work. I'm sorry. I love it if 60 people are invested, but it's really hard to have a robust brainstorming discussion with 60 people. That's a lot. So who? So if you're preparing the meeting or preparing for planning, who should be involved? And again, there's no exact right or wrong, but there's tendencies, especially in Rotary clubs, about who should be considered. Go ahead.
I think certainly the board should be involved.
And should we say both current and upcoming?
Yes.
Do we agree?
Mhm.
I would just add a caveat. The current board, so if I have a board member who's currently on the board and is not going to be on the board next year for whatever reason, I'd like to know ahead of time how that person is feeling and it is not, let's say, upset and going to use emotion to kind of be a negative in the meeting. It can happen. So if I'm aware of something with a board member that may not be serving, there may be other reasons why people may not be happy. It just would be, that would be part of that due diligence, you know, and just say, you know, we'd really like for you to participate. We understand you're not going to be serving on the board next year. Are you interested and willing to be part of this discussion about the future of the club, even if you're not going to be serving in a board role next year? Because there could have been something negative about why that happened. Maybe they were not effective in their role and the incoming president wanted to make a change. It's just good to kind of have a sense of level of commitment, if that makes sense. Who else?
If you have somebody that has a passion for this, a champion, in other words.
Or for the planning or for things that the club's actually going to do, or both?
Both.
So one of
Yes.
the things, if I could, one of the things that my experience has shown me is that there's a lot of bias that floats around in clubs. And so one of the challenges is what the composition of a planning group would be is really trying to work on what the composition of the club is now and what anticipates. So in other words, a combination of old veterans and people who, because those perspectives are critical, that we don't go in there with the bias that we know what we know, and therefore we're not going to go beyond that. So one of the things we've always tried to look at is, I've hesitated about boards because boards come in with biases that it's hard to change during the process. So one of the questions is whether you want a full board members or one or two members who are minded.
Totally agree. And that could be another issue with the current board. If there's things that, let's say, we're not going well and they have a bias towards them, then they're not going to be as effective in the meeting if they can't leave that bias behind. And again, that's part of the due diligence and the discussion with people who are invited, is you really want to make sure as much as possible not to have people in the meeting that have biases. It's one thing to have opinions, but I don't want to have emotion drive my participation. I still want to be objective as much as possible. Does that ring true for a lot of you who've been involved in these, you know, planning meetings and trying to keep bias out? It's just tough.
Jeff, one of the things that Lincoln 14 did was we brought in a consultant to work with us, both in the kind of the pre-planning, who worked maybe a little bit more with the president and the past president and the president-elect, and then worked a lot with the board and some other members for the planning piece. So that person can be that's the more unbiased piece, or it could also help be the champion piece. And that worked really well.
Yeah, so that's a great point. Sunny and I have talked quite a bit. You know, in our district, we don't have a lot of capacity in terms of people who would be comfortable coordinating or facilitating these kind of meetings. So part of our charge is to kind of build that capacity, but at the same time offer ourselves and say, look, I may not be a member of your club, but I know Rotary and I don't have any biases towards your club. So if you need an outside person to help, I could do that. And that is certainly something good to think about. And if you are an incoming president, you may want to think about, do you want to bring someone in to help run through this process who's not a member of the club, but who knows Rotary. We want to make sure that the person who's facilitating this knows what we're talking about, right? But they don't have to be a member of the club, and in some ways, I think it's an advantage not to. Yeah. Excellent. Who else? There's a couple of other who groups that we should consider. Okay. Hearing silence, I'm going to start typing. So if your club has an important partnership, relationship, let's say there's a charity that you work with that you're very close to, I think it's a good idea to have someone from that other organization participate in your planning, especially if they have a vested interest in the success of the club. They bring an outside perspective, so they're not likely going to be biased, but they have an interest. And I always find that when we bring in partners and collaborators, that third-party perspective is kind of nice. They're not in the box that we're in, so they see things differently. So I will almost always I will invite someone. If we have that relationship, I will invite someone that represents that group. First of all, they really appreciate it, but secondly, their input is often very unique and very thought-provoking that we didn't get from the membership. Any thoughts about that?
Jeff, if I may mention another, well, partners is very important, but also stakeholders.
Yes.
As you know, we have, for the grants is now required that you do a pre-assessment. So it's very important to keep in touch with them, see what they need. And I think it's important to get them involved.
Yeah. And again, you don't want to have, too many, but if you have one or two, you're going to get that point of view, which I think will lead to a better product. Anyone else? By the way, and it was mentioned here, newer members I think it's great to have someone that's new in the club be in planning. Again, no bias, outside perspective, but they joined for a reason. So I think it's great to get their input, and I think it's good to have input from people that have been in the club for a while. Again, as long as they're not kind of stuck in their mold and all that. It's important people that participate are open-minded and honest about how the club is doing. When you do that assessment, however that's done, it's got to be open and honest, right? We've got to look at the good and the bad. If it's just, if we just gloss over and say, well, these results really don't indicate how great we're doing. It's like, well, that's not going to be an effective meeting. We've got to be open and honest as a group if we're gonna be effective.
I was thinking when you were talking about that, we can probably include assistant governors or lieutenant governors because they see the perspective from different clubs. We haven't done it, but I think it's a good idea to include them in the future.
Yep.
So invite a Rotary.
Yes. Well, and that would be another one of those stakeholder partners, right? So it could be the Rotaract or the Interact. Absolutely. But yes, having your, now another possible role, and I've seen this happen, is the assistant governor facilitates the meeting.
Exactly.
That's another possible role. They can be a participant. They could also facilitate, especially if it's something that they're comfortable with. So that's another possible role for them. All right, this is great. The main thing is there's a lot of different groups of people to think about. You also want to think about the overall size. Again, 50 or 60 is just way too many. Whether you're a small club or you're a large club, it really shouldn't affect the size of a planning group. I like to think about, 15-ish, 15, 20, 12, somewhere in there. If it's 4 or 5, I'd like to have additional points of view. And that's where you can maybe bring in some partners and collaborators. But I find that I can get kind of optimal brainstorming with somewhere between 12 and 15 people, all thinking differently. no yes people in a planning meeting. They've got to be open-minded and willing to contribute. Any other thoughts about the who part? Okay. Anything else about pre-planning? We've done the assessment or survey. We've looked at previous results. That was the know where you've been.
So one of the things that we encountered, and I saw that throughout the district, is not having a timeline, not capturing what this process actually looks like in terms of, is it a multi-event? Is it a 6-month period?
Yep.
I think that that's critical because a lot of people walk in without really understanding what this whole process takes.
Yep.
And it may take a long period of time or a short period of time.
That's great. That's great.
And it's
So,
a really good
yeah.
one. That's good.
Yes. So the title of this session is strategic planning. And for a while I said, let's hold off on the word strategic, because just doing this for a 1-year plan is fantastic, because a lot of clubs don't. Ideally, our planning should be longer than a year. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is if we were involved in anything like a global grant or something that has more than 1 year of life, we'd like to take that into account when we're doing our planning, not just, how are we going to deal with the first year of a 3-year global grant, for example. So that's one reason. The second is you've got things that, let's say you've got membership goals. Well, in many cases, it takes 3 to 5 years to get to the membership target that you're looking for. So you're thinking longer term anyway. Now you may say, well, for that 3 to 5 year goal, what can we do in the first year? That's very reasonable. But thinking longer than a year is healthy. And Rotary International has kind of set up the infrastructure for us to think more than a year. So our recommendation is to not just think for the year, although again, that's better than not thinking for the year, but think about that 3 to 5 year time period. If you are a president-elect right now, and I think we've got a few on RLI, you probably know who your successor is going to be. It's a good idea for that person to be involved in this as well, with the idea that it's going to take more than 1 year to execute this plan. So you want to have the next group of people who are going to be serving in club leadership roles participating as well. So again, try to go beyond the 1 year. But again, 1 year is better than no years.
Jeff?
Yes, Sunny, I was hoping you would jump in on that.
No, I think everything you said is just perfect. I agree completely. And I want to move just for a second from the macro to the micro and say that one thing I've found useful in planning any meeting is to think about what the guidelines for the conversation might be. So, I mean, it almost goes without saying, guidelines, yeah, that's okay too. It almost goes without saying, but it's useful to mention things like, let's agree one person talks at a time, let me direct traffic, let's avoid, let's be succinct, so that everyone has a chance to speak. Things like that can make a big difference.
And the person who's running the meeting, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you have a consultant or facilitator, that's something that they're going to be very involved in.
Right.
Making sure that whatever rules we come up with, that they are followed. One at a time, succinct. Would be nice if I added a C.
Yeah.
What does consensus mean? Like, we all need to agree, but we don't need to necessarily love what came out of it. I just need to say, yep, my voice was heard. The sense of the group was this, and I can live with it. All of that needs to be, so it should be developed before the meeting, and it should be reinforced at the meeting.
It makes such a difference to do this before anyone has transgressed.
Yes. Oh, I forgot to mention. Yeah. I forgot to mention. That's great. No, that's very important. Excellent.
Thank you.
And that's true for any meeting.
Yes, any rules of life.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let us shift to planning. So,
Jeff,
yes, sir.
another thing is when you're having this discussion is everybody agrees to focus on relevant information you need, because we have so much information in our hand. We need to focus on what we need for this task.
Yes, relevance. Yeah, yeah. And I think, so there's other things we didn't mention, like there's going to be an agenda, presumably. Here's what we're going to cover in the next 6 to 8 hours, whatever it's going to be. Everything, and I would echo what Tom just said, everything that we do to prepare for this should be with the idea that it's going to be relevant. No tangents. Stay focused. And a lot of what goes into planning for a meeting like this, for it to be effective, it needs to be that focused, succinct, to the point, stay on topic. And if it's not relevant, there needs to be a way to say, you know, thank you for your idea. That doesn't necessarily seem to be relevant to what we're talking about. Maybe we put that in a parking lot. It's pretty common. We don't want to lose your idea, but we need to stay focused, right? So excellent point, Tom. Okay, so the last thing as we close this part out is that this does not take a day to do. So if I'm going to do planning tomorrow, Sunday, I don't want to be doing A through J today. It takes time. And I would say if you're going to prepare for planning, think about a month or two. You may have to do that club survey. Analyze the results. Invite who you want to participate. All of these things we talked about takes time. So just thinking backwards, if you're going to have a planning meeting in March, I would say January would be a reasonable time to start preparation, somewhere in there. Okay, so now we're ready to go. We've done all the preparation, all the legwork, all the due diligence. Now we're doing the planning. So one of the things we want to talk about here is what are the key elements to the plan that we are going to be developing. Okay, so think about, so just a little bit of grammar here. Planning is a verb because it ends in ing. So it's a process, a series of steps. The plan is the noun, it's the thing. It's the outcome of all the work that went into the planning, right? So if you have a really good planning process, you're likely going to have a better plan. There's a connection there. Not 100%, but the more effective the process is to develop the plan, the better the plan is going to be. So one of the things we want to talk about here are what are some of those key elements that you want to have in the plan that your planning process is going to drive us towards. Does that make sense? Did the question make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I didn't mention this when we started, but even though RLI changes the modules every few years, I don't exactly follow their outline for this. I just find that it's easier to think about it as a process and go from beginning to end. So if you're looking for all of this in your participant guide, it may not look the way I'm doing it. So I apologize for that, but I just find it's easier to kind of walk through the steps. Elements of the plan. Yes?
Focus areas.
Love
For
that
example,
Yeah, the goal.
membership.
Yep. How about foundation is another one, right?
Yep.
There are a lot of terms that are used for things like focus areas. I've heard buckets. I like that one. Categories, pillars. There's all sorts of names for this, but it really helps when we talked about staying focused and succinct and all that. you want to have buckets identified or focus areas. And say, here's a focus area. What are we going to do in that area? And again, I would argue if you have 30 focus areas, are you really focused?
Right.
Oh,
Not so much.
Not so much. So something like, I'll use the vague term, a handful. A handful of focus areas. And again, in preparation for the meeting, we want to be thinking about these focus areas, but there may be one or two that come up during the meeting that the people that were preparing didn't think about, right? So
would that be the same as listing the steps?
Steps for?
Achieving goals.
To achieve the goal?
So let's say goals and how to achieve them.
Yes.
Yep. So, boy, there's a lot here. So again, Rotary Club Central, which is linked in the participant guide, is where we in Rotary are supposed to enter our goals and monitor our progress against them. What's not in Rotary Club Central is how to achieve them. And in fact, I'll just put, that's often what we call the strategies or tactics. How are we going to do this? So Rotary Club Central is where the actual data is. And it's always good to go in and look at how clubs are doing against their goals, because again, if we're not doing well, why should we just continue doing what we're doing? We may need to make a change. But the plan should also include, for every goal, how are we going to achieve that? Right? Steps, like you were saying. There's going to come a point when we get really into detail and minutia. And the detail and minutia are important to how we're going to achieve them, but that may be more, let's say, for a committee of the club to do after the planning session is over. So maybe at the planning session, we lay out 3 or 4 high level how we're going to achieve. And then we hand it over to a committee, let's say the membership committee, and say, here's what we came up with for general strategies. For recruitment, we really want to focus on diversifying our membership. And you all at the committee level can figure out kind of daily, weekly, the various things we need to do. Does that make sense? So there's going to come a point when the how to achieve, when we get into detail, may shift to a group at the club rather than the group that was doing the planning. Yes, Pat?
Probably should have a budget.
Yeah, that would be nice. Anything else about the goals and how to achieve them before we talk about budget and other items? Anything else about that? There's one other thing go ahead.
Timeline or deadlines?
All right, so we might as well do the infamous acronym. So have you all heard of SMART goals?
Yeah.
All right, so let's specify. So the S for SMART goal is what?
Specific.
Right. So be very specific, not, world peace. Love world peace, but it's not specific enough. It's hard to know how you're doing if your goal is not specific. The M?
Measurable.
Right. So there better be something I can quantify, because that's what's going to go into Rotary Club Central, not our members are happier today. Like, well, on a, how are they on a scale of 1 to 10? So I was on the phone with Comcast yesterday, so I was about a 2. Right? So it has to be measurable. And sometimes it's hard to find measures for goals, but we really need to do that. We've got to have things we can look at and say, yes, we're doing well, or no, we're not doing so well. We can't just intuitively know that. The A.
Achievable.
Yep. So in the realm of possibility, we can do this. And So with that, we can do this, but it's more than just waking up in the morning, right? We don't want achievable to be so minimal that there's no work involved. And we also don't want it to be so out in the stratosphere that it's not achievable. But it's often good to have what we call stretch goals. Like, let's say for the next couple of years, our goal is to increase 5 net new members. That's achievable. Our stretch goal is 10. So it's still achievable, but it's something that suggests a little bit more emphasis and focus, and maybe we can go beyond.
Jeff?
Yes.
On measurable, I think also have to realize it's not a negative thing when you write down information that's occurring or not occurring that you want to happen. It gives you a way of saying, do I need to modify what we're doing to achieve our goal?
In fact,
it's not a minus to not have a negative.
Right. What gets measured gets managed. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. If it's bad, it needs even more management, right?
Correct.
So we don't ignore it, we manage it, we deal with it. Excellent. By the way, there's another A sometimes that I'll hear, which is attainable. No big deal, it's still an A. And kind of similar. What is R?
Relevant.
So what does relevant mean?
So to me, relevant means if you go back to your pre-planning and you analyzed your survey goals, it should relate right back to what the data shows.
Yeah, relevant to us. You know, we are a Rotary Club after all. We should be setting goals that are relevant to being a Rotary Club, right? And relevant to our Rotary Club. This is our hub. This is kind of our niche. You know, we work with children's charities. So our goals should be relevant to that because that's who we are, right? So part of that relevance, and we talked about it up here as well, is we are a Rotary Club and we are a specific Rotary Club. So again, the facilitator is going to be important here. If someone comes up with something that's not relevant, and we talked about that before, you can kind of get off on tangents. Be respectful, but again, just say, you know, well, how does that fit into us? And again, it's not for the purposes of putting them in a defensive position. We're trying to understand how is that relevant to who we are. If we can talk about it, maybe we'll end up agreeing with you, which is wonderful when that happens. But that notion of relevance is really important. And what's the T?
Time bound.
Time bound. So that's what you were asking when we started this.
Yep.
What's the time? 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? Yeah. Smart goals. I'm going to be honest with you all. My personal disappointment since I've been in Rotary and in district leadership is seeing how many clubs don't have a planning process setting SMART goals. They may have goals. In some cases, maybe they just said, well, we'll just do what we did last year, that kind of thing. This is so important. If we want to improve as a club, it's virtually, you can be in a Rotary Club that's very successful without this, but it's not going to sustain. But a process like this and a focus on SMART goals and getting all that buy-in, that's how a club not just can be successful, but can remain successful. So. Okay,
Jeff?
Yes, sir.
You also need to plan your activities, because that's how you identify your situational leadership.
And I'm gonna, if it's okay, Dan, that was Dan, right?
Yes.
I'm just gonna put in parentheses key activities.
Yes.
Because again, I mean, the club may be involved in hundreds over the year, but in the strategic planning meeting, we're gonna focus on the key ones, like our big fundraiser, our big membership drive, committees will focus on the other activities. Like today, we're going to have this program, the speaker, but if it's okay, Dan, the key activities, the ones that are strategically
Still
relevant.
need to identify your key situational leaders.
Yes. And by the way, not every situational leader is going to be in the room, right?
That's correct.
So it's important that there be a communication soon afterwards of, again, a very friendly one saying, hey, we come up with something, we think you'd be the perfect person to lead it. Here's what we're talking about. How does it sound, right? Okay.
Jeff, I don't know if you're going to address this, but one of the challenges I think that in the early stage is having some clear definitions of things that we think we know, but we don't necessarily. What I mean by that is, like, when we talk about a SWOT analysis, I think a lot of people misinterpret it and don't really understand that it's really more of a diagnostic and data capturing tool more than anything else. And the difference between a strategy per se, or strategic imperatives, and tactical imperatives. And sometimes I think with a group that really hasn't sort of done this before, we mix and match things, and we actually limit ourselves in terms of what we want to achieve. So definitions early on, I think, do help everybody say, okay, I got it now. I understand this is what we're going to do. This is my focus. This is how I need to.
That's great. And I think, again, in preparation for the meeting, we should, as a group, decide what do we need to define and get that out to people ahead of time. That first document in the participant guide has basically a little SWOT table. They don't call it that, but it's basically what it is: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Again, that's part of that initial assessment. Again, open and honest. But yes, any terminology that we're going to use, let's add another one. How about mission? I'm curious, does any of your Rotary clubs have a mission statement other than the Rotary mission statement?
We tried to create both a mission and a vision statement.
How awesome. Did it work?
No, but it was a good exercise.
Excellent. Good. Thank you for trying. It's, yeah. Whoops. Arturo?
We have our mission, which is to serve, and I'm looking for it, serve as a liaison between the U.S. clubs and the clubs in Mexico. That's kind of like our mission.
Yeah. And again, that becomes, going back to relevance and focus. If your club has a mission statement or a purpose statement, something like that, a vision, it provides an anchor for going forward. So someone brings something up and someone can ask, well, does that align with our mission? Now, if the answer is no, it doesn't automatically disqualify it, but it does raise a question. Well, if it doesn't align with our mission, should we be doing it or should we be focusing on it? So it does provide that additional alignment. And that was one I was going to add. I think it's important to reflect in the plan that we are aligned with Rotary International, we're aligned with our district, rather than just doing random things, right? So it's nice to take a look at, and RI just updated their strategic plan recently. It's a really good idea as part of that preparation and assessment to take a look at what RI's priorities are, and there's 4 of them, and say, how are we going to align with those 4 priorities that Rotary International set out for us? It may be easier to do some than others, but it's good to have that in mind before going into planning. Sunny, anything about that? Or Bob?
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Bob had to leave us.
Okay. We're still aligned with Bob, even though he left us. So that's also really important too. what other elements of the plan should we consider? This is quite a bit here. Budget was mentioned, that's huge, right? So anything that you're doing that involves some kind of financial anything, you want to have the budget figured out kind of concurrent with the plan. Like make sure, and in fact, if it's okay with you all, I'm going to add other resources. Could be people, equipment, money. I've seen so many plans developed where resources were not considered, and then we found out we didn't have the resources, and I said, well, there goes the plan. We might as well come up with another plan to get the resources that we need to develop or execute the first plan. It's good to think about the resources while you're doing the planning. So whoever came up with that, it was a great idea.
And Jeff, that would include other potential partners as well.
Sure. Yep. Materials.
Yep.
All that. I can only think of one other I'd like to add, but do you all have anything else you want to add to the elements of the plan? Okay, I'm going to start typing. How are we going to communicate it? How are we going to share it? How are we going to get buy-in? Within the club, with our partners, sometimes it's not easy to communicate a plan, especially if the plan is going to move the club in a different direction and the people that have been in the club for years are not going to be receptive to that. How is it going to be communicated? Does that make sense? And we'll talk about that in the specifics in post-planning, but I've seen a lot of plans that don't talk about, how it's going to be communicated, and then it ends up that we're fumbling to try to, get the word out, and we just don't do a very good job.
You mentioned buy-in. I think that's worthy of writing it down.
Yep. Gotta have the buy-in.
I think it's also important with communication, maybe like advertisement and marketing. I think, how are we going to communicate it to like the people that, if you want people to come to something that you've planned, they have to know about it.
Yep. As an example, so if your club does kind of have a mission statement or a vision statement, then maybe that goes on your marketing materials, like your little credo at the bottom. There's a lot of ways to get the word out. And part of what we're also thinking is not everyone needs to see the full plan. I mean, it would be nice to have it like a document on our website, but maybe we communicate the high points. Here's what we came up with, everyone. Let's go through it, make sure it makes sense, ask questions. So part of it is the how much detail do we need to provide for the different audiences, right?
Jeff, Debbie has her hand. Debbie Cox.
Oh, hi, Debbie. Go ahead. And you're on mute.
It's Gordon, not Debbie.
Hi, Gordon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm wearing my Debbie mask. One of the questions I had was, what is the process that you should be used to get the club involved in setting these goals? So it's more of a process issue.
Well, that's a great point, Gordon. I was just about to interject that generally, or in our club at least, there is a step between the creating of the plan and the implementation called formal adoption, where we send it out to the members for comment, and then we have the club actually vote on it, and then note that it's been formally approved.
Right. Also, if I understand your question, Gordon, I think it's good to get feedback from the club, again, as part of that initial assessment. And it may not be a number, but it might be like, how are you all feeling about our membership? Does it need to go up? Are you comfortable with where it is? Get their assessment of what they want us to be focusing on, even if they're not quantified goals. And And the planning team should use that in their considerations, right? So I may not say, hey, everyone, set a target for us for next year. But if they're saying, Jeff, we really need to focus on diversity this year, I'll say, you know what? Thank you very much. We'll make sure that diversity is covered when we get into our membership goals and strategies. So
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Jeff, I'd just like to add that I think the issue of communication is even more important than actually put the planning together, because until you actually have a full-scale plan on how you're going to communicate, whether it's through club assemblies, whether it's bringing in outside stakeholders to understand what you're doing, that all this planning will not get embraced. So the critical thing is, I agree with you that a communications plan on how this gets rolled out in multifacets is critical for this to be successful.
Yeah.
That's the point. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that's the point at which, in that communication or marketing segment, where you link that the relevance is linked back to what you have identified as your issue.
Yep.
When we can see that it all fits together, it seems to just make good sense.
Yes. So that actually provides a perfect segue into what do we do after planning meeting's over. And communication is a big part of that. And I put down club assemblies. I think club assemblies are a perfect place to discuss the plan, make sure there's buy-in, be open, but also explain, let's say, rationale. So we had a president a few years ago that wanted to move the club in a very different direction. And he didn't get a lot of buy-in because in part, he didn't provide the rationale. He just said, I think we ought to slide over here. But even if there is a rationale, if it's going to be different and you've got people that are locked into their box for a while, that buy-in may be hard to get. It's like, and part of it is, if we're not doing so well achieving our goals, then we need to think differently. If we are doing fairly well achieving our goals, it becomes a little bit harder to sell a different type of plan, right? It's harder. So you want to think about all of that. What is the message we're trying to convey? How are we going to get the buy-in? And, ideally it's 100%, like every member. We are not monolithic in Rotary. So there may be a few people, hopefully, not more than a few, that are not happy with this. And I've seen cases where club went through a planning process, developed a plan, rolled it out, and a few members were not happy and they left. That's unfortunate, it happens. Hopefully, that plan will improve the overall health of that club for, let's say, the next few years, with the unfortunate loss of a few people that it just didn't work. Whatever happened, the buy-in wasn't there. So that's a balance we have to play. Yes.
Even in working with a company, if you're changing directions, one of the things I always worked with the presidents about is you're going to lose some of your key people when you do this, because they will not be able to make the change with you.
Right.
And most will come along, but there'll be a few that, you either have to commit to it or commit to the people.
Yep. It's that short-term pain for long-term gain. I hate to put it in words like that, but we have to have conviction around the plan. And we didn't mention this yet, the plan's going to change. So, whatever plan our clubs had for this coming year I don't want to say they're out the window, but we weren't planning for a pandemic. So plans will change according to circumstances. And that's something that we need to know going in, is that this is not cast in stone. It's dynamic, but it's dynamic based on circumstances, not, we came up with this goal and, we had a change of heart. It's like that. We don't want that kind of change. We want change based on circumstance and where it's warranted.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Before we leave this topic, I do want to mention that the people also matter, and there are often opportunities to find a way for even the curmudgeons to contribute to
Yes.
whatever's envisioned. So I'm hoping we aren't going to leave this topic thinking, oh, well, the hell with them, just.
No, it's we do our best, but know
Yes.
going in that there may be, there may be a few people that no matter what we do, they're not going to accept the change.
Possibly, yes. Thank you.
And one of the key ways of dealing with those people is offering them the opportunity to join the effort.
Yes. In fact, if you know ahead of time that you've got those curmudgeons out there, have at least one or two of them be part of the process. I'd rather hear from the curmudgeons early than after the fact.
Yes.
Yep.
I call them Eeyores.
Yes.
Sometimes you lose and sometimes you don't win.
Yeah. So, so communication is a huge part of what happens after the planning is over. Another huge part of it is the execution of the plan. We've got about 20 minutes left. I'm going to try to make up a few minutes for us starting a little bit late, so I may go a little bit over, but so here's the nuts and bolts, folks. And I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure many of you have gone through this. Developing a plan is not that hard. It's paper, it's thinking, it's, food is usually involved. Executing the plan is really hard, especially if it's not a simple plan. And where we fail in most instances is not in the plan that was developed, it was that we didn't execute it well. And that's so unfortunate because if we don't execute the plan, we don't even know if we had a good plan or not. If we didn't execute it, we might have had the greatest plan in the world and we didn't execute it and we don't know. On the other hand, if we do execute the plan and it was not a very good plan, we're not going to get good results and we can change the plan. But if we don't execute the plan, it's a huge unknown. So here's Jeff's view on this, and others may have different views, and I think that's great. Here's my view. And I reinforced this when I was club president. I wanted to make sure that I sat through a lot of board meetings because I was on the board before I was president. And the committee reports were really dull. They were, here's the 20 things we've done in the last month kind of reports, like bullets. And I thought, bullets don't impress me. I'm sorry. And the number of bullets don't impress me. What impresses me is, how are we doing towards our goals? High membership committee. We set a goal of this. How are we doing towards that? To me, that's a lot more valuable in a board meeting than 20 bullets of membership activity. So for me, the key to executing a plan is empowering those who are in the best position to execute the plan with the knowledge and the tools to do so. And in many cases, club committees are going to, if not execute part of the plan, they're going to lead in the execution of the plan. So we go back to these focus areas we talked about up here. There's often a strong alignment between the focus areas and our club committees. It's not 100%, but it sure helps if we've got one club committee focused on a focus area. I mean, think about that. If you've got 3 committees focusing on the same area, they're going to fall on top of each other. They're going to overlap, and it may be hard for them to function. So in an ideal world, one committee, one focus area. If you're the membership committee, focus on the membership goals. Doesn't mean dismiss the other ones, but this is your focus. That's why it's a focus area. If you're the Rotary Foundation committee, you're focusing on that part, our fundraising goals, our Paul Harris members, things like that. We're not living in silos. We are interconnected, but we still have to have focus. Yes, Lori?
If I may share an example related to what you're just talking about, I currently serve on the board for Lincoln 14, and I'm a board liaison. So in my liaison role, we have 3 committees that are involved with membership. So one is recruiting new members, one is working with the new members to move them with their badges, and then the last one is keeping our members engaged. So my job as the liaison is to oversee those 3 areas and coordinate with them so they do exactly what you were just saying we don't want them to do, which is stepping on each other's toes, but really collaborating. So every board meeting that President Eric has with us, that's exactly what we start with. We look at it's our goals, it's our strategic plan, and how well in our liaison roles are we meeting that strategic plan. And then another piece that's related to the communication that I've seen him do this year is not every single meeting, but maybe it's once a month. Sandy, maybe you can jump in here, but Eric then overviews for all of the members. Here's where we are in terms of our strategic plan.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been really, really helpful because it just continually keeps it front facing.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just said yes.
Yeah, there's a point in going through all this work. We are good people that do good things, right? If we're in Rotary, we're good people that do good things. But if we're good people that do good things without a plan, then we're not going to optimize what we can do. That's just how it goes. So if you can keep that plan front and center, stay focused. This is our charge. This is how we're doing things. Now, again, circumstances may change, but if you've got that focus, the club is more likely going to be successful. Let me see, there's a couple of chats here. Yeah, great idea, agreed, great idea. So my charge to the committees is you're gonna be given, in all likelihood, a goal and some high-level strategies that the planning team came up with. Your job is to figure out what we want to call the action plans, the operational piece, what's it going to look like weekly, monthly, right? The detail. And it should align with what we came up with. Like if these were our high-level strategies, like we're going to focus on diversity this year, then your action plan should reflect how we should be seeing diversity improve tactically, right? So this is kind of where the tactical component is. So again, the key is when you're in your planning meeting, you don't want to get too much into the weeds. First of all, it takes a lot of time. But it's just easier to charge the committees to come up with the real detail of the how, right? Does that make sense? And again, what I found is that committees appreciated that they weren't just reporting out 20 activities a month. They were focused on how's the plan going, which leads to the next notion of post-planning, which is monitoring the results.
That accountability factor.
Yes, love that word, especially when we're volunteers, because it's a little harder sometimes. Look, Rotary Club Central exists for 2 reasons, as I see it. One is so things can be entered, and 2 is so that they can be monitored. It doesn't really help much to enter goals and never monitor them. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. It also doesn't help to enter goals 6 months into the year which the goals are for. Because if they're not entered, then they can't be monitored, right? So please For those of you who are in club leadership, going to be in club leadership, please be timely with your use of Rotary Club Central, both as a data entry and then as data monitoring. It fits really well with the notion of the club assemblies, like maybe once a quarter. How's the club doing on our goals? And do some charts and graphs and things. But monitoring results is huge because we don't want to assume that everything is going fine. No plan is perfect. So the monitoring results with accountability may lead to adjustment. That's part of why you monitor. You monitor to kind of get a sense of how things are going, and it may lead to subsequent decision making to say, yeah, we set that goal, we set our strategies. 6 months in, we haven't seen any progress, so maybe we need to revisit that. 1 month in, I would say, is too early to tell, but there should be some point where enough time has passed to say, how's this going? If you set 3-year goals, you certainly want to look at it after the first year and say, this was a 3-year goal. How did it go after the first year? Do we need to adjust the plan for years 2 and 3, right? If it didn't work, why not? And can we make it better? So it becomes like an ongoing process. Yes, Tom?
That gives you an opportunity when you're looking at this saying, did the goal we pick or the objective, is it too large? Do we need to break it down into smaller pieces even?
Right.
Jeff?
Yes.
I'm not sure where this fits. I want to underscore that statement you made about our not working in silos by mentioning that we are finding more and more that the lines of demarcation between membership, public image, and foundation are considerably blurred.
Right.
And that members have an opportunity to forward our goals in all of those, even with one event. So
right.
For example, if you have a service project that was funded by the foundation, bring potential members to participate and make sure it's broadly publicized. So that's just an example.
So this is huge because we talked about it up here, but we didn't really give examples. I'm so glad that Rotary is reinforcing the connectivity between these functions. So think about it. And we've got our district public image chair, Arturo, as one of our facilitators. Public image in and of itself is a strategy to accomplish other things.
Yes.
Public image done well grows and retains members. So if I'm the membership committee and I'm given the membership goal as let's say the chair of the committee, I'm gonna say fine, but I'm gonna work with the public image committee because they're part of this strategy. We're not doing it by ourselves. So Arturo and his group, they've got a piece of that membership strategy focused on how public image helps retain and recruit members, right? And the foundation's involved. So I still want a committee that's in charge, but I want to collaborate with others that own parts of that strategy. Did that reflect what you were saying, Sonny?
Precisely. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Years ago, we could have just been totally siloed because Rotary was not reinforcing the degree of collaboration that they are now. And to me, I still think they can add more like, well, where do service projects fit in? To me, service projects are a strategy to everything we do, if done well, right?
Yes.
So there's opportunities, and that's oftentimes where the success really is how well do we collaborate and not just work in silos. We still need to have leaders though. So I'm still gonna say membership chair, you are taking the lead on the membership goal, but you're not doing it by yourself, and it's not just your committee. But you're gonna own this and work with others to make it happen. Yeah. Yep. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We have gone through fairly detailed a planning process, including elements of the plan. I'm going to go back to the document here. Hopefully, you know, if this is not something that you're that familiar with, you have a better appreciation for why this is so important. Why that analysis is so important. Again, open and honest. If you're an incoming club president, please don't wear rose-colored glasses. Be open, and if things are not working well, be blunt about it. Possible areas for improvement. To me, status quo is the least that should be in our plan. Keep doing what's doing well, yes, but we can do better. You know, we're doing these workshops on being a vibrant club right now, and you could take the word vibrant out and put in a word like high performing or successful. We can always be more successful, and why shouldn't we strive to be the best Rotary Club we can be? Why do we just want to be okay? And how the improvements should be made, that's where we get into the execution of the plan. And that's where the rubber meets the road. If you are an incoming president, and if you need help with this, let us know. This is not easy. It's not easy. Especially if your club has kind of been on remote control for a while, just kind of humming along. That striving to be better is not easy. Change is not easy.
Jeff?
Yes.
I think that's really where the concept of having a vision is so key. Because if you as the leader can articulate why we might want to strive to be better, what we gain from it, what's possible not only for our community but for us, then it becomes a lot easier really fast.
Yes. Okay, so it is 9:30. So we did catch up on time. Are there any final questions or comments before we take a break? And I've got one announcement before we take a break, but any final questions, comments, thoughts? For those of you who are incoming presidents, hopefully this registered with you. If not, please let Bob or myself know, because we want to help you. It's a lot to think about here. Questions, comments?
Hey, Jeff, one thing, just wanted to assure everyone that we will get the notes that you made, that we will get those emailed out to everyone. So yes, you will have a copy of that information.
Yeah. Okay, if there are no questions, we're going to take a break. And again, we're going to reconvene at 9:50, but in the 20 minutes coming up, please go ahead and get your hat. And when we reconvene, we will take a picture. So see you all in 20 minutes.